Did you know that kinky wellness is integral to your self-development? Hi, welcome to The Partition, home of kinky wellness, the ultimate destination to explore the integral connection between kinky wellness and your personal development. I'm your host and kinky wellness coach, Dana Shergill, and each Monday I bring on a special guest to dive into specific aspects of kinky wellness. From unconventional practices to thought-provoking conversations, I'm here to break down barriers and redefine the boundaries of wellness and pleasure. Don't forget to join me for my solo shows on Wednesdays, where I explore even further into the multifaceted layers of kinky wellness. So let's strip away the shame and taboo together and have an open conversation about it. Welcome back to another episode of the Kinky Wellness Podcast. Today, we welcome somatic pleasure coach James Humecky. James is an accomplished intimacy and relationship coach with over 30 years of experience. James helps individuals and couples connect deeply with their sensual and sexual selves, guiding them through transformative experiences using tools like breathwork, movement, mindfulness, and conscious touch. His unique approach to somatics helps liberate creativity, sensuality, sexual potential, and of course, pleasure. Today, we discuss the nuances of cathartic experiences and why not all of them are created equal. James also touches on how to discern between true release and emotional bypassing and why we need to expand our, quote, body vocabulary. So sit back, relax, and let's welcome James to the show. Welcome to the show, James. How are you doing today?
I am doing good.
Well, I'm excited to have you because today we're going to be talking about pleasure somatics and kind of what that entails. So let's start just a little bit about you and kind of how you got into this space and what somatic pleasure is.
Well, let's see. Let's see if we can go a not too circuitous route. So when I was about 40, I think actually I got into massage and body work as a professional. I've always done touch and working with people that way. But going into that space, and the teacher that I had was a really good, the initial teacher that I had was really good because he invited us to use our own personal experience and bring that into the work. So everybody, we're encouraged to like develop a flavor for of our work. And also he was, I would call, very psychosomatic. It wasn't called somatics at that time. That word hadn't really like broken into the scene much, but it is that work. Very Ida Rolf and Moshe Feldenkrais, these people that went deeply into the body and understood the body-mind connection and understood the way that we carry memory. We talk about issues in the tissues. That was coined a long time ago, but we carry memory in our body. So there was a lot of, I would say, there's a lot of instruction in how to release that kind of memory out of the body. Unfortunately, I don't feel like that there was a lot of instruction on when you should do that.
Mm.
And really both checking in with the client or the person that's receiving the body work about that, and really finding out where they are as far as their level of capacity to navigate when cathartic moments happen. Yeah, there's a real art to both as a practitioner being able to navigate that space, and then there's a real art to being the person who is going through that experience, right? So the way I describe it is, it was almost like an an edict to go after the trauma, in a way. You ask the right questions, you get people to breathe in a certain way, you touch them, with some kind of in some place in their body, usually with a pretty deep pressure, and you can create these cathartic moments. And it's not that they're not real, it's just that, is that the appropriate thing to do, right? So that's one thing that was part of my journey. And within that, though, what I discovered when I actually started studying body work and into people's bodies, into my body, I quickly recognized the array of avenues that one could go with that study. And so it excited me because I tend to be more of like a generalist, and having a wide array of interests and desires. And so it just felt like it was this big, wide open field to play in while still having, this focus of the body and massage therapy. So I practiced that way for quite a while, built this huge business here on the Mendocino coast, and started getting sick. I was right opening a wellness center, and I recognized that I was starting to get sick, and then I was, had to question, why am I doing this? And my answer to myself was that what I'm really doing is trying to build a business that gives me a income that is going to allow me to travel. And then, like I said, I was getting pretty ill, and I woke up one morning and I was like, wait a minute, I've got all my skills right here in my hands. I can actually just travel now. And so that's what I did. I closed my business and I sold everything I had. And I told my kids I was leaving. My son had graduated high school and was basically out of the house anyway. My daughter was already married and had kids. And so this was when I was about 45. And I was just like, I'm taking off and I'm traveling around the world. And what I was looking for were communities of people that were into the health and wellness and healing work. And it was this huge exploration and discovery and self-discovery. So I've been on that for about 15 years. And there's a couple of things that I recognize that happen with people. And I was working with, people in Central America and in Europe and in, here in the States as well. And I was kind of doing that method I was telling you about, like, let's what's wrong with you, and let's dig into that, and let's get you to breathe. And people were having these, big experiences, and, starting to call me shaman, and be my teacher, but not in a good way, like kind of like be my guru kind of thing. And I just I hit a point then where it was like, wait a minute, this is definitely not a path that I want to go down, because I can see what's happening is people are coming in here for this experience, but they're not actually healing. They're not actually taking this out and being able to use it to create a better life for themselves. And that took me into so much more study. And I, went down all these different paths of study, everything from Tantra to in Taoist sexology, and a bunch of psychological paths, and chaos theory, and, and information theory, and complexity. And, so I just went studying down all these paths. And one of the things that I recognized during that time too is that people would be able to manage or navigate a certain amount of their trauma or a certain amount of their story, but in the end, it would invariably come down to something to do with sexuality, and like the whole pelvis. And then for, female bodies, the breast area was kind of, not kind of, like super taboo, and there was no allowance or even like really good training of how to navigate those spaces and help people deal with their trauma and whatnot, or even just their story, conditioning, anything. So it was like, okay, we can open up the head and the neck and the chest and the back and the legs and the feet, and, reflexology and all this other kind of stuff. But oh my God, no, wait, don't get anywhere near the genitals. And people would also be telling their stories. Oh, my mom's story, my dad's story, and this trauma and that trauma. And then it would get down to that sexual kind of traumas, especially, or just the repression, the conditioning, the stories, the narratives that they had. And it was just like this kind of a hard wall, right? So that really, again, pushed me into like this deeper and deeper study. And how do you navigate that space therapeutically and ethically? right? Because it's really easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's really easy, but it's very possible to somebody to say like, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to have a pelvic release, or I want to, I want to have, I want to include, these parts of my body in the body work. But then when it happens, right, if the conversation isn't full and consensual, then things get incredibly dicey, right? Because people get either re-traumatized or the work becomes misunderstood, and also people's shame and guilt and whatnot will come up as well, right? So it's been this long journey of coming up against these places and going, okay, I need to know more about that. I need to learn more about that, right? And then just given my own personal proclivities and desires, and so ever since I was very young, I knew that I was very interested in sexuality and sex and things that seemed deviant, you know. And so, I was learning how to undo my own conditioning in that, right? And also seeing where my clients and friends and other practitioners were coming up against the same spaces. So I really dove into this study around kink and BDSM because, well, first off, there was that like, oh, what's that? Let's do that. Like floggers and paddles and electricity. Oh my, kind of a thing. Like, what are we going to do here? And that opened up another whole level of understanding and learning. And like I said, going into, uh, let's see, I studied surrogate partner therapy, and coming out of masters in Johnson, and I studied consent work, which led me to Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent and doing workshops with her as well. It led me to live on a polyamorous community for quite a while, and temple nights, and but people really conscious around navigating consent and health, and safety. So I just kept piling on this information and these learnings and trainings in my journey, and eventually got to this place of like, okay, if I maintain, you know, James Humecky massage and body work, there's a lot of success available there, but there's a limit and there's this place where I'm not being fed, and I know that there's a lot of people that are not getting met the way they want to get met. And how do we cross that barrier? And so I developed this work called somatic pleasure. It kind of sounds like more than it is, really, but it is very basically that. It's practices and methods for navigating that space when people are looking for, needing therapy, healing, understanding, knowledge in their full humanity, which includes their sexuality. So it's just that way of like, let's bring it back in to the fold. So it's not a taboo subject. It's not just completely hypersexualized. And it is actually something, when it's done in this way, actually gives somebody agency and resilience and the tools to navigate so much more of their life, like their whole life, right? Because nothing now is hidden, nothing now is taboo and off base.
All of that sounds fantastic because I feel like when it comes to a lot of modalities of health and wellness, pleasure and sex tend to be on the other side of this invisible line. So, bringing in this pleasure somatics, what would be some of the key foundations of that makes it different than just regular somatics?
Well, see, that's an interesting question, and I will answer that. But first of all, I don't think that there's regular somatics and pleasure somatics. It's all what we are, somatic beings in the terms of what somatic means. Okay, so I just a quick history lesson, which I probably don't need to give you, but I put it out there anyway. Soma, right? It was a Greek word, and it just meant the whole body. And it wasn't just the physical body at that time. It was used also for like a body of soldiers, for instance, and it was not just a living body, it could be a dead body. Soma just meant the whole being, basically. And the way we use it now, and then the way that I use it, is more about this mind-body connection, or the non-separation of brain and body, like it all working as a whole. And some people will talk about it in this way, and this is the way I look at it too. It's this physical form is a ecosystem. It's not a bunch of separate parts. It's a whole thing that's working together all the time. Your nervous system and your brain and your endocrine system and your organs and your little finger and your big toe and all of that kind of stuff. And then by extension, it's the understanding of how interconnected we are with our environment, the breath the air that we breathe, and the ground that we walk on, and temperature and weight and the spin of the earth and gravity, and the whole bit. So I look at it as, there's millions and millions of bits of information coming in and through our body any given second, just constant, right? And we have really good mechanisms for not being consciously aware of that all the time. Otherwise, we'd be walking around in a major psychedelic trip all the time, But at the same time, we've gone through centuries and millennia of shutting down things and repressing feelings and sensations, and our connection to the planet and to the earth and to our sexuality and to each other, right? So somatic pleasure, the way that I look at it, is opening us back up to our more natural state of perceiving all of what's happening around us, to the level that we're comfortable and capable, right? So when I referenced cathartic moments in a little earlier, and then you think about in some practices where they say like there's the kundalini rising, or there's an enlightenment experience, or any of these kinds of things, right? What they're talking about is that sudden expansion of perception, right? The delayed mode network in the brain drops a little bit through breath work, through meditation, through movement, through body work, through psychedelics and other things, whatever people are using, and all of a sudden you're like, you have this big, wide open sensation, and you're like, oh, I just saw God, which anyway you kind of do, right? So I don't think those kind of sudden experiences are helpful in the long run. They're helpful in the short run because you're like, oh, this is possible. But unfortunately, it's not couched that way, right? I tell people catharsis is not cure. Just because you had a breath session and somebody dropped an elbow in your back and you saw God doesn't mean you got cured. That's not a cure. That is just an experience, right? So in my work and I used to pursue that. I used to do that with people. And so I'm very aware of it. What I'm doing with the somatic pleasure is to slow that opening down. Like just slow it down, slow everything down. And when you think it's slow enough, cut it in half and go slower. And teach the foundational tools to be able to navigate when and if that stuff arises, when that cathartic situation happens, when that kundalini comes up. I really don't like referencing the terms like that, kundalini and whatnot, but people might understand it. When that thing happens, when you're in therapy and you just get that aha moment, right? And then how do you navigate that? That's when the work really begins. So what I felt and what I learned over all these years was that it is much more effective and sustaining to teach people how to navigate those spaces, because there might be the deep trauma from whenever childhood or transgenerational or things that have happened to us. that wants to come up because, that memory's being held in our tissues. And then there's the things that happen to us day to day that um, can be very traumatizing, or just throw us off of our center, pull the rug out from under us, kind of a thing. And I wanted to give people, I wanted for myself to learn, and then I wanted to give people the tools of how to navigate those spaces. So we use breath work. These tools are really easy and foundational. Breath work, starting with just the most basic diaphragmatic breathing. Like, are you actually breathing? And are you breathing fully? That's one of the most basic questions, right? It's amazing what happens for people if they just sit for 5 minutes and breathe a coherent breath. 5 minute, 5 second inhale, 5 second exhale, and just do that and just pay attention to what's happening in the body. Okay. And then the next thing is movement. And I everything is always in motion. So I never tell people like, hey, let's go for a moment of stillness, because that's pure bullshit. Is really the body is moving, and we're moving constantly. So it's like slowing the mind down, the awareness down enough to be able to perceive some of that subtle micro movement that's happening. I mean, I've done 10-day Vipassana sits, and you're sitting for 10 hours a day in one position, breathing. And you know what? There's so much damn movement going on in that space. It's incredible, because, like I said, your heart's beating, you're breathing, you know, little micro movements are always happening in your body, no matter how still you get. So teaching people about movement and equating that to breath being like a foundational or fundamental movement in the body. It's and one that you can't actually stop. You can slow it down, but you can't live without breathing for very long.
Mhm.
you know and then, like, moving your body in as many different ways as possible, and building your movement vocabulary, and like, whether you're dancing ecstatic dance, or salsa, or you're crawling around on the ground, or climbing trees, or this kind of stuff opens up your body and your mind and possibilities, and creates new neural networks. And it's just cross crawl. You've heard of that, cross crawl and tapping. And I mean, even EMDR, the eye movement therapy, that's a movement. And it's really, it's like, I mean, it's just so foundational and fundamental. It's almost silly. And then, you can call it mindfulness. I call it sensation-based awareness, which is just being present with all of that that's happening while you do it. And when I reach out to grab the glass, and all of a sudden I feel the temperature of the glass, and I feel the weight of the glass in it. I feel the slosh of the liquid in the glass, and then I bring it to my lips, and I can feel it. So you can get really granular with it. But really, if you practice this kind of mindfulness in whatever you're doing, eventually what it happens is there's these just momentary awarenesses. So you're not having to, like, be, like a I'm moving my hand to the
Mhm.
floor, you know.
Yeah.
Thought is crossing my mind. I mean, but it's okay to do that. I think it's wonderful to do it that way, or go in and, like, how does that strawberry taste? And you like just doing like that food, and you're like, just lick it, just feel the weight, and let the juice, like, so food play, and all of these kinds of things, and it's amazing. So then, what I noticed with a lot of people, therapists and teachers and whatnot, that are in kind of the somatic space, right? And we're not even talking about sexuality yet. But in that somatic space, because of the repression and the taboo and legalities and ethics and whatnot, touch is almost always off the table between the therapist and the client, right? Especially if you're working with, like, licensed boards and that kind of a thing. And oftentimes, at best, there is some, like, there's training that helps your client learn how to give and receive touch with a partner, but there's no actual happening in the space. So coming from a massage therapy background, I'm like, wait a minute, that's insane, because you know is one of the quickest and most fundamental ways to get to the issues that people are talking about in their minds and their bodies, right? If you feel, if you understand that it's muscle memory that is oftentimes holding you in place and continuing to generate an anxiety cycle, why the hell wouldn't you go get touch? Or why would going to a massage therapist and going to a therapist be so separated,
Mm.
right? So people don't come in for a massage and then go see their therapist and say, this was happening and these things opened up. And so that right there is sort of the impetus for the surrogate partner therapy that Masters and Johnson's developed many, many years ago. And yes, there we go. I said breath, movement, mindfulness, and touch. Those are, for me, the four pillars of somatics. And then the communication piece and the recognition of our primal, sensual, sexual, creative selves that is in our cultures oftentimes very repressed. And in that repression, like the pelvis is the place that sort of carries that, generally speaking, because I don't separate the body into like, that's your anger zone and that's your man zone and that's your, it's like when you have experience, it is stored somewhere in the body. It's just that because the pelvis has this societal block on it, it just feels like it's people are carrying a lot of stuff down there, and especially if it's some sort of sexual trauma, because obviously the genitals are here in the pelvis, right? So when people come in to work with me on this level, instead of going directly into that trauma or into the pelvis, right, we do this kind of work and we build this foundation. They begin to learn how to navigate their breath and move their bodies and explore and be mindful of that, and learn how to open their own self up for touching themselves, and not necessarily, again, sexually, but just, to me, everything's sexual, but it's like, that's just me. So, learning how to pay attention to their skin and understand how, this caressing or whatever it is affecting their internal state and the nervous system. And then when and if it continues and becomes necessary to begin to explore the pelvis and the openings there, they're much more able to navigate the feelings and things that might come up. B, have agency to say no or say yes in whatever kind of work we're doing, and have the resilience and capacity to integrate the learning that comes from that, when the emotions and the feelings and the memories arise. And so it just, two things happen. One is, just through learning this foundational work, oftentimes the issue just kind of goes away. Because they're like, oh, I've opened up, oh, I see that now, I can breathe that now, I know how to manage my own inner state, and boom. And so then the real deep issues, if they are there, because I always tell people, you're nobody's broken, we're all perfect, whole, and complete. The body did this thing, has this memory to protect you. It's doing its job exactly how it's supposed to do it. Now you just have to let it know that it doesn't need to do that anymore. Doesn't need to hang on to that thing. And so helping people just get to that place is oftentimes, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, is enough. And when we do decide, or to go into more, like I said, pelvic release work, it's done with this full consciousness. And always navigated to the level of necessity. Like what is that level, right? Sometimes it's just sitting down and doing Thai massage kind of work with a foot, pressed up against the buttocks and just holding that, and then kind of moving the leg around, and then the just that, things begin to unwind in the pelvis, and it's pretty amazing. And goes all the way to internal work and palpitations internally and holding, and then people need to experience an orgasm, so that can be part of that, and it can be so therapeutic, right? But you have to be very gentle navigating that space, and everything has to be very clear, and there has to be full consent and understanding. So I don't know if I actually answered the question you were asking me, but there you
No,
go.
that was great. Now, what do you find are the biggest challenges that people face when they're first going into this work?
Usually the biggest challenge is facing your own demons, facing your own taboos and facing your own conditioning and your own implicit biases. That's some of the hugest stuff, right? So, is it therapeutic to flog somebody? Is that therapy, or is that just fun? And then how do you tell the difference? And how do you have those kinds of conversations? And how do let's say I'm the one that's doing the flogging, or I'm the therapist, how do I navigate that within myself? You know, because I will have an implicit bias about what that means, or I will have an experience, or I will have a desire. And so, navigating that within myself and being really honest about it,
Mm.
and that being part of the whole process with the person you're working with. Are we just playing here? And then, that's one kind of conversation. Is this something I really want to do to you? That's another kind of a conversation. Is this something you really want me to do to you? Are we talking about this being a way of exploring that sensation based awareness, this somatic piece, to get to a bigger understanding of who I am or who you are, right? So, being able to have those kinds of conversations internally. What is my purpose here? What am I doing? How am I holding this energy, this space, right? And flogging is a bit more extreme than just doing body work. I shouldn't say just doing body work, diminishing that, but it's the same kind of a thing, right? How do I navigate this space? It's similar to just sitting down and talking to somebody and looking them in the eye and breathing together, right? What are I'm always having to look at what is happening in me? What of me am I bringing into this space? And so when people are going into this kind of work, you'll also often see that they really haven't done that work for themselves. They just have some skill or some training, and they're like, I'm going to bring this to you, you
Mhm.
know. And one of the main tenets of my work is the full understanding that we're two human beings in this space working together, and that is the power of the work. It's because it's taking away the sort of hierarchy and the secretiveness and the objectivity, and just say, like, we're two human beings here working together, and this is how, it took two human beings to make the issue. It's going to take two human beings to help undo whatever that is, you know. So yeah, therapists coming in what, like, again, I'll just say, like, any kind of therapeutic work or coaching, if they're coming in with sort of this hierarchical view, I'm the coach, so I'm going to be the one that tells you everything, they invariably run up against blockages. And then being humble enough to recognize that and do your own work, you know? Yeah, it's a moment to moment thing. Hmm.
The intention is quite important, I think, in any type of work. And even with something that you said with there's almost what I see is some people chase the big emotion release. And you're right, like it's the beginning of the work after that, but I tend to see that too. And it's people, I think they might have a misconception that because they're having a big emotional release that they're getting this big healing moment, but then they don't follow up afterwards. And that's something that it just keeps going. Like the journey, you still need to follow up with that big emotional release that you just had.
Mhm. Yeah. And I've trained with, like pretty major, let's say breathwork practitioners or movement people or meditation practitioners, and then, in the therapy field, and even more, more specifically in sexual wellness, and sexual wholeness. And yes, what you said is exactly right. The, you know, let's do sex magic because and everybody feels good and oh my God, and then the next day, like because of my, what's the word, bias, the thing that I wanted shows up, right? Because our brains, when we do that kind of work, actually geared to seeing confirmation bias. That's the word I was looking for, right? There it is. There's that, whatever it is, that perfect person or that car or whatever. But being able to understand the psychology of what's happening when you go through a cathartic experience or chase that emotional high or do these astounding, magical, transformational, types of work, being able to actually have some objectivity and understand what's happening, like I said, psychologically and emotionally, brings more sustainability to that kind of work. So I'm not downplaying having a cathartic moment or chasing an emotional high or being in extreme sports. Let's jump off that cliff and everything's going to be good. Um, my squirrel suits right out here in my van. No, but human beings need novelty. We need to have those highs to some extent, but what we're missing on a large, oh, here's the word again, to a large extent, what we're missing is the tools to navigate that and make it something that's worthwhile and sustainable and actually healing, you know? And then you have what, in some circles they call it the bliss bunnies, that are just running around to the next. We're going to Bhakti Fest, now we're going to go to Burning Man, and now we're going to go to, and I know those people, just because of the work that I do. I connect in those realms to a certain extent. And I love it. I mean, I love going and being in Maui and doing drum circles and, fire dancing and swimming with the dolphins and the whole nine yards, but it's not a way to live or navigate reality. It's most often used as a way of sort of bypassing reality. And you see a lot of heavy duty emotional and psychological issues in those communities, and you see a lot of trauma happening. You know, you go sit in a tent with some dude. I won't say just dude, but somebody. You know, and you do some breath work and you have this meditation, and then let's see where this goes. And sometimes, usually, it's pretty benign and totally fun and whatnot, but there's oftentimes that really dark side to all of that. So, I'm just gonna, going back to some of your initial questions about like what is somatics, somatic pleasure. and what are some of the blockages that people come up against, right? Um, one of the things that happens is when people begin to have experiences in your presence, on your table, in your group that you're holding, or some kind of, it's really easy to begin to believe that you actually have some kind of magic sauce that is, that you can do this for everybody, or that it's about you. So this is another big thing that comes up for people that are doing any of this kind of work is, I'm a da 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 da, whatever it is, I'm a medical intuitive, so I'm going to tell you, what's going on in your body. Um, and that's a big danger zone, a big red flag for me. And it's something that I have sometimes, to my own detriment, have avoided doing myself, because I do have a lot of skill, I have a lot of experience, and people do have real true experiences in the work that I'm doing with them yesterday, you know and I could sell that in a different way, and I could be making a lot more money, let's say, or I could maybe be more famous, or whatever it is. But I recognize really early on that, not that fame and money are bad, and not that I'm not pursuing them, because I am, but it's how I'm doing that. Like, what is my intention, and what am I actually selling? So I'm always like, wait, what did I just say? What am I selling here? What is my purpose? And you didn't really ask directly about this, but I kind of want to bring this in, around kink and BDSM, right? That community, to a large extent, and I've everywhere from the East Coast to the West Coast. I haven't really been out of the country with that, but I get the feeling of it from, connections to different communities. Because the consent conversation is so important, imperative, and paramount, like that alliteration, in this field, that there is a greater tendency towards real, authentic connection, honest connection, human connection. And it doesn't generally have the tendency to move into like esoteric, spirituality, and bypassing, because no matter which end of the flogger you're on, you know, you're in a really visceral interchange with somebody that can also be dangerous. So in a way, it's, if you talk to people that are extreme athletes, for instance, and you just spend time in their presence, and maybe not even extreme athletes, but, professionals, football players or whatever it is, there's a sense of maturity and a sense of understanding reality that isn't necessarily present when in the communities that are pursuing just the feel good, like I said, the bliss bunnies, the spiritual communities and whatnot. Or, like firemen and soldiers, and people like that, people that are nurses, these people that are like in the place where they're facing death and destruction, and even butchers. I mean, I've got a couple of friends, and even some family that are like butchers, and you go there and you talk. There is a connection to reality, like a visceral, sensorial connection to reality, right? That, well, I would say that most of us humans used to have more of that because we were more involved in our day-to-day survival. And I would say that in my work, I'm attempting to bring people or help people recognize that part of their humanity, and come back to, this full expression of humanity, of their humanity, and this full sensual experience of it. And I just feel like you can't escape that, but you can bypass it and repress it.
And it's good to bring it back because I think that there's a lot of people that are unaware that they've even lost touch with this. And so it's almost like we have to educate to be like, no, there's other ways of living where you can be more present and
Mhm.
living in the moment of where you are and what you're doing with intention and things like that. Now, one more question just about sensation-based awareness. Now, you have sensing languages, and I was wondering if you could just touch base on what those are just real quick.
Well, the language is actually being able to listen to the body and name what's actually happening in the body, right? So this is another place where I think kink and BDSM come in. Like, it's really powerful because when you have it, something happen, you're just like, "Ah, oh," you're having these like and movements, and like, people are crying or they're laughing or whatever they're doing, or they, there's some piercing happening, and all of a sudden, the whole body is sweating. That's sensate language. That's sensate language. That's reality in the moment. That is present moment, what's going on. Sometimes the language is like, "Ugh," or it's like, it feels hot in my belly, you know, damn, my heart is racing, I'm sweating crazily, or, so that's the sensate language. And we have it in all, it's intrinsic in all of our language. If you just listen to people, we're talking about it all the time. But, then people will say like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't feel anything in my body," which is totally untrue. So part of this work is to help people just recognize what's happening in any given moment. And through that recognition, being able to begin to determine how to navigate their life. So, you could say like, where's your boundaries? Where's your yes? Where's your no? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? And understanding like, just because my heart is beating fast doesn't mean what I might think it means or what my perception and experience wants to translate it into. I could actually sit with that sensation and look around me and recognize what's happening, and then from that begin to understand what my body is saying to me, because your body's talking to you all the time. Don't do that, do that, kind of a thing, right? This is safe, this is unsafe, be careful, you know go do that. Yeah, have fun. I mean, it really, the body is talking to us all the time. So the sensate language is something that is very individual, and it's very present moment, it's very visceral, it's subliminal, and it's nonverbal, right? So like, even saying a language is, maybe not the right way, but it is a language. It's a nonverbal language. And when we can slow down to listen to that, we actually can make better decisions in our life. you know
Mhm.
Slow down to listen to our own body and begin to discern what that means, not necessarily listening to somebody else's narrative of what that's supposed to mean, but determining for ourselves agency, self-determination, discernment, and then leading really to resilience and a better life. We're not chasing down happiness, we're not chasing down trauma, we're not chasing down an enlightening experience. We're simply going in and learning how to listen to our bodies. So you can call it intuition. And again, like I said, determine our course of action. And it's a constant momentary experiment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. So, before you let us know where we can find you, do you have any advice for anybody that wants to go into somatics?
Yeah. Well, first off, is just be curious, be really curious and open. It's just, in general, it's not a bunch of people trying to hurt you. Realize that life isn't not about trying to hurt you. And with that curiosity and that open-heartedness and open-mindedness, you can just enhance your full experience of any of this. And in that curiosity, go down as many paths as you can, and try it all out. I don't know. I don't think I like pistachio ice cream. oh, but maybe I do, and yeah, so that's that curiosity and just that open-mindedness is just incredibly important. Don't yuck somebody else's yum. And it, generally speaking, as long as you're not hurting somebody, unless they want to be hurt, which is different. But as long as you're not purposefully, hurting somebody or they're not hurting you without consent,
Mhm.
bad ways.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, James. And where can my listeners find you to reach out for more information if they'd like
Yeah.
to?
So I do have a website. It's somatic-pleasure.com. And on there you can find, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and you can sign up for webinars. And I have some courses on there that you can sign up for, self-directed courses.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'll put all your links in the description so people can reach out to you. But for my listeners, you guys know what to do. And thank you again for coming on the show, James. And as always, stay kinky.
Yay.
P.S. If you're interested in learning more about how kinky wellness is the evolution of sexual health and healing, be sure to visit www.kinkywellness.ca, where you can pick up your very own copy of the Kinky Wellness textbook and discover how kinky wellness is a healthy outlet for aggression, imagination, and attention.